morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, LinkedIn Live. Happy Friday. Do you know what? Literally, as I said that, the sun just came out. It's a sign, Richard. It's a sign.
Love that.
Richard, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I think the sun started slightly earlier for me. So yeah, hopefully it continues. But if it goes glum in the room, we all know why.
For sure. We
Yeah.
need some sun the week that we've had, honestly. Thank you all for joining. If you're listening, if you're watching this live or you're listening in live, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching us on the replay, thank you for taking some time out of your day to watch this, to get into this conversation. So I am joined by the amazing Richard Kuti, who is the inclusion lead for And Digital. And amongst other things, and I think I mentioned in my post this morning, because I didn't realize until we were doing the prep call, that you were one of the original founders of the award-winning Embrace network off of Serco, right?
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive, because that network, I certainly hold it up as definitely doing some good stuff, and quite a mature network as well, actually. So welcome, and thank you, Richard, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I've been an avid listener over the last, a few months on a Friday. Look forward to the talk. So yeah, it's good to come on the show.
Absolutely. So Richard's joined me, and obviously there's always just a disclaimer. So any views expressed this morning by Richard are those of his own personal sort of volition, rather than the views of his organisations or any of the organisations he's worked for. And so what we're going to be talking about today, so Richard, you've moved into the tech space in the last, I want to say, like 18 months. Has it been 18 months? So we're talking about employee networks in tech in particular. So obviously, you started the amazing Embrace network at Serco, #Serco I'm proud. And now you're in the tech space. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that. Let's just start by talking about inclusion in tech more broadly, because tech sort of got this reputation as maybe being not one of the most diverse sectors. So let's just talk about that more broadly. How are things? Is it as bad as people think it is?
It's an interesting one. It's so I think the best way to summarize it is tech is extremely diverse, and I think there's lots of stats to back that. It's no doubt about it, and for loads of reasons, including the fact that it's very relatable at this moment in time. It's very, very on trend in terms of how tech intertwines with everyone's lives. And so it makes it easier for people to, I guess, be involved in some way, shape, or form. I think the $1 million question is tech as inclusive as it is diverse? And that probably is where we start to say, okay, maybe not as much. And just an example, like from a diversity point of view, it exceeds diversity in terms of like ethnicity. It's very forward thinking in terms of creating roles for those who are neurodiverse. And it's, increasingly there's a lot of data that we can see on the demographics of, tech as a sector, widening participation to all different types of people. But then if you look at the leadership of the organization and the movement of tech, it's still very much, very much one particular group, mainly white males that are at the forefront of, even though from a skill set, from a capability point of view, it's probably lower barriers to entry into tech than most sectors. So yeah, I think it's incredibly diverse. You can't deny that, and we need to keep on encouraging that. But can we be more inclusive? Absolutely, it needs to be more inclusive. Otherwise, we're limiting the view on the talent that you can have access to. Really,
it's interesting, and we'll maybe delve into what you mean by the fact that it's diverse, but maybe isn't inclusive, and we'll unpack that. Good morning, Niharika from the Embrace Network. So Nihar is the current chair. So you pass the baton on to Nihal, current chair at Embrace Circo. Nihal, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Yeah, there's definitely a difference, isn't there, between diversity and inclusion, as we know. So when you say it's diverse, but it's maybe not that inclusive, what do you mean by that?
I think it's so from for me, purely diversity is, if we just look at the makeup of the sector, you know, there's still, you know, right throughout, there's different types of people that work, and you know, that you can look at that from a gender point of view, ethnicity, you know, again, sexual orientation, all the sort of typical forms of diversity that we look at. You know, factually, we can look at the numbers there. But then when you look at the experience, and I think somebody, I can't remember who said it, but like, diversity is quite hard facts in terms of numbers. Inclusion is about feelings and experience and perception. And when you look at the experience of individuals, it's still a lot of the time people feeling either marginalized or not like they're getting the opportunity to progress, even though tech is very much a sector where if somebody can, you know, if somebody's good, they can show that ability in terms of their work. And so from that point of view, I think, you know, the main differentiator is the experience of individuals and groups in the sector. I think it's not reflective of how great, you know, the work is and the potential of the sector it could be moving forward. So I think that's what I mean in terms of like those differences.
Absolutely. And good afternoon, Jade, as well, who's joined us. Thank you for joining. And I think you're right in terms of, you know, inclusion is that thing of, you know, do I feel valued? Is my voice heard? You know, do I get a say in things? You had mentioned there's a report out this week, isn't there, in terms of diversity in tech? I mean, I must admit, because would you say then, in terms of diversity, would you say that that's improved? Is that what these reports are showing, that actually diversity has massively improved in the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, so the report is the Diversity in Tech report by the Tech Talent Charter. It's a fantastic report. If people haven't looked at it, I do recommend a read, if not just for the summary section. And in a lot of places, you know, tech exceeds the UK workforce. So, for example, from an ethnicity point of view, you know, the UK workforce is 80% white, but in tech it's 70% white, and the other percentage owes to ethnic minorities and those from different ethnic backgrounds. In leadership roles, you know, from ethnicity point of view, it's 14%. Women, it's 21%, and even non-binary as well. So there's a lot of potential there, and versus, you know, a year ago when it was less, and you can see the efforts that are being made in tech to kind of like continue to diversify and push that. And I think that's organizations recognizing the opportunity that is there, because again, tech is becoming more intertwined with life. Lots of big organizations are investing in their tech functions and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, do you know what, you've sold it to me. I believe you, Richard. I think anybody that's in listening, which you know, and I know you said, you know, notwithstanding the challenges at the leadership levels, but I think a lot of people listening will, you know, if they've not been that close to the sector, will have this view of, you know, it's still very, you know, male dominated, all of those sorts of things. But you've definitely given us a different view, which is actually, yes, it's maybe come from a certain place, but things are going in the right direction. And actually the challenge is more the inclusion. And we know, here's the thing, because we know it's easier to get diversity than it is to sustain inclusion, right? If that makes sense. And actually, if you haven't got the inclusion bit right, all you end up with is a revolving door anyway. So that's
it.
It's very interesting.
And I think that's where it's at. It's maturing in order to understand that and to recognize, again, like, otherwise we'll be sweeping talent under the rug. And we need the talent.
let's just talk before we get into the employee network bit. The one thing that I wanted to talk about, because I know when we first met on a call when you were at Serco, and you were in the D&I team, but you had come from the data team. Is correct, isn't it? So I wanted to talk about just firstly, and it does link into the employee networks. It's the importance of data in space of data inclusion. What's your thoughts about that, and how organizations can work on this and get access to better data to support what they're doing?
Yeah. So I'm a stickler for like having that data in the first place and whatnot. And I think more than anything, it just lets us know where we're at, and gives us a roadmap for where we want to be. And when we think data, a lot of the time it's the concentration is on the numbers. So like the big data points. What does our leadership look like as a percentage for representation? What is our pay gap? Things like that. Actually, as well, just as important, and something I've really come to embrace over the last year or so. No pun intended there, by the way, embrace. But has been, the qualitative data. So the stories and the insights from our, people within our organizations and our communities, that because again, that provides a picture or a snapshot of where we're at. And so for me, it's always been important to again, push for more data, but push for the insights that the data are bringing, because every piece of data every piece of data that we can get access to is a piece of a wider story. And if we're able to string it together, it's like, okay, what is the narrative here? What is the general experience? And equally, when you're working with leaders and whatnot, it's almost like the language of progress, isn't it? It's like, okay, so the people want to know in scorecards, are we red, amber, green on this? And how do I progress it? And not that every problem's approached in the same way, but I'd like to think from, in a fast-paced business environment, which most business environments are anyway, what gets measured gets done. And if we're not able to measure it, it's hard to quantify its importance and whatnot. So I think, data, it has to be at the center of our planning if we're trying to move something forward. Because again, if we don't take a picture of where we are today, we don't know if we've improved when we look at it tomorrow.
And I've got another question for you, just linked to the data, because my experience, and something I've shared with some people, and I've posted it on here, is a model of ERG maturity. And from what I've seen, often ERGs just start from that place of, we just want to get people together. We need to do something, and they just start by literally just getting people together in a room. And often the data doesn't come until later, because sometimes you don't even know what data you need to be looking for, reaching for, measuring, or whatever. Does that chime with your experience? And there's this thing about you don't necessarily have to have all the answers at the start. It might be something that comes along a little bit later for employee.
100%. And rightfully so, because I think you kind of I'm obviously thinking of my own experience and others, but you kind of unite on that common experience, common background. That's the starting point. And so naturally, it's going to feel very organic, a bit like, oh, are we doing the right thing and whatnot? And sometimes it doesn't feel very strategic, but I think it is an important foundation, because the first thing you're establishing is connection between one another. And then, once that's in place, again, things like the data, like the employee experience and whatnot, that's something you can then start to look at. But establishing the connection strengthens your voice when you are speaking on behalf of the community you're representing. So definitely along the roadmap, doesn't have to be the first thing on the.
Yeah, I agree. But it definitely, you know, at some stage, you know, as you say, especially when you're trying to influence internally with, say, for example, the leadership team, etc., it does help then afterwards that your planning and your, you know, initiatives and your activity have been anchored in, this is what the data was telling us.
Yeah,
This is the impact that we're trying to have with this basket of things that we're trying to do.
yeah,
Let's get into then the role of employee networks specifically in
yeah,
tech. And I know when we had our prep call, I was sort of saying that I often we hear about like women in tech
yeah,
network, internal networks and external networks, so like, you know, cross
yeah.
organization, and also a lot of black in tech as well. So just
Mm,
talk about, you know, what is the role of employee networks in tech at the moment? What are they typically focusing on, and how do you
yeah.
see them, you know, working in these organizations?
Well, I think it's first of all worth noting that, or saying for me, and it's probably similar in other sectors as well.
Mm.
Often the imperative or the conviction to do something about diversity and inclusion
Yeah,
very often has started with the employee networks, because it's those with the lived experience that
yeah.
are going to put their hand up and say there's a problem here,
Mm,
uh, kind of thing,
mhm,
very often.
mhm.
And it kind of ties in with like justice in general, right? Like it's those
Yeah,
who
yeah,
are feeling the issue, that raise the
yeah,
problem, say we
yeah,
need to do something about this. And that's certainly been my experience in the tech
yeah,
sector as well. It, you know, there's it. I think, I don't say greater innovation, but such powerful innovation,
yeah,
in the same way that it, you know, employee networks are kind of leading the charge in some ways
mm,
on DEI, and also I think surfacing in the most important way the lived experience of those in those communities. And I think more so because obviously I've come in sort of like 2022, last, you know, again, as you said, last 18 months.
mm,
The things that have shaped the world today and are shaping the world today,
mm,
it's employee networks that kind of lead the charge on a lot of the responses, and again representing that voice and the kind of shift from, you know, I think I guess D and I being focused intrinsically or just focused solely on what's at work, to
yeah,
actually things morphing into, you know, actually what is going on in the world as well. And
yeah,
that's pretty much been happening since Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth, to really
yeah,
understand not just the lived experience at work, but the lived experience in general.
yeah,
And so that there's been that. And I think from my point of view, obviously it's you're kind of in this position, I'm sort of the same when you work in DEI, where it's like you have the same chats over and over again.
mm,
For me, with employee networks, certainly ours and we called ours communities.
mhm,
Um, you know, there's an energy there,
mm,
and a innovation of presenting, you know, solutions to problems and to challenges, but equally to connecting with others as well.
yeah,
That you kind of you know, day to day, you say don't get, but like, you know, you kind of miss out on it, and then it's like to bring the fun part, you know, the actual fact that it's about people,
yeah,
ultimately at the end of the day.
yeah,
And yeah, I think, you know, beyond that, to the external
yeah,
network, like things like Color in Tech, there's a lot of women in tech networks
mhm,
associated
mhm,
with different bodies as well. I think a lot of inspiration, as well, and a
yeah,
lot, for me, what I draw from it, a lot of stories of what is possible,
yeah,
or the art of the possible. That,
mhm,
I've never experienced that so much more than I have in tech, in terms of like
okay,
looking at that. And yeah, loads of examples of that, to
yeah.
be honest. So,
That's really
yeah,
interesting. It's really, and you're right in terms of, you know, you're sort of saying about, you know, the external, both in terms of external events, you know, as you say, like whether it's, you know, Black Lives Matter or, you know, the war in Gaza, you know, so what's happening in the Middle East, the rise in anti-Semitism, the rise in transphobia, blah blah. I'd be really interested to get your take, particularly because you've got networks that probably are quite external facing because of, as you say, because of the nature of tech as well, and also tech and STEM being, you know, externally, kind of areas that the whole of society is focused on, almost, in terms of getting diversity into those spaces. So let's just dive in a little bit in terms of the external events. What do you see the role of employee networks in responding to big events that happen? Like, for example, we've had the Diane Abbott issue this week, but yeah, big events like, the war in Gaza, or a rise in transphobia and those sorts of things. What is the role of networks in that?
I think,
if any.
I think, the number one role for a network for me is representing the voice of those in their communities. So again, and whatever they profess on the tin. And I think that's, for me, that's always been the power of networks and coming together to be, more than just one voice, multiple voices in unison. And so I think that doesn't really change when it comes to these as well. These are, they're incredibly difficult challenges to navigate, particularly in the context of work. But it's still important to navigate them, to face into them, to discuss them, both from an organizational point of view, working for the organization, but also from a network point of view, in terms of, like, being in a community with those who may be feeling a similar feeling across the board. And I think that's where the dialogue between business and the employee networks, really come alive in these sort of moments, because it is, no one asks for these things to happen. We don't see them coming in advance. So it's very much we react, kind of thing. But I think there's also the opportunity to look at, okay, we've reacted this time. How do we proactively deal with something like this when when it comes in the future?
Yeah, definitely. A couple of things that you said there, because at its heart, employee networks, it is about, at its core, it's fundamentally about creating more of a sense of belonging and inclusion. Right? At its core, there are these other benefits that come on top, like the spin-offs almost, the byproducts, the progression, the development, all of that stuff. But at its core, it's about belonging. And, you were saying there about, people being able to talk about things. And as you were talking, you said about discussing things as well. And I know that one of the things that a lot of employee networks use really effectively is things like listening circles, just listening. So, with some of these external events, I could imagine actually that potentially there are some good, maybe, opportunities for listening, for some safe spaces, potentially, maybe for communities to just sit, particularly, if we think of things like, the increase in transphobic hate crimes, for example. You could imagine communities, networks creating space just for those communities to sit in a safe space and have those conversations. But also, as you were saying, actually, having that conversation with the business, and almost like the leadership team, again, creating a psychologically safe space to just listen to how that community is feeling. It's quite powerful, actually.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully, respond as well, in the best way possible. It's, again, and so many instances where it never, I'm a big believer in we have to keep the dialogue going. It's not always straightforward or simple, easy to like go for it, but that's the job, as they say, that's the role, I think.
It's interesting, as we're talking, because I'd imagine when I think back to, particularly when I think back to 2020 and George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, a lot of organizations were struggling with how to respond, really struggling with what should that public response be. And actually, just on the back of this conversation, you're right about often, often there's a pull for D&I from either one or two employees, if it's a very small organization, or a handful of employees, right? And there is something about, I almost wonder if organizations had those networks, would they have therefore been better equipped? You could just imagine, I could imagine the leadership team and then the PR teams listening in, see, okay, how are people feeling? What do we need to do? And that would have been a much better, more cohesive way of going about responding, rather than just a knee-jerk, we need to post a a black square or a rainbow flag or whatever it be, you know?
Yeah, do you know what? I agree with that. And you could see with some organizations that had that kind of like well-trained dialogue with their networks. And
Yeah,
I think, that importance on their networks
yeah,
for, just in general,
yeah,
for employee voice,
yeah.
you could see, okay, like the thoughtfulness in the state. I know it sounds
Yeah, yeah,
in the statements and things like
yeah.
that. And then I think some, it was almost like almost like standing up some
Mm,
sort of structure,
mhm,
and that's where we heard a lot of the, okay, like, I don't know, CEOs having a call with the race networks or the
mhm,
cultural networks, the Black network, to kind of like get the insights where it was like,
mm.
actually, we've not been down this road before. It's
Yeah,
unprecedented, but we're gonna stand something up. And I think it was a big lesson in that sense.
yeah,
But I also have to say, because at the time I was an employee network chair, obviously at Embrace. A lot of the time as well is, and this is where we have to give employee network leaders credit. I also didn't have the solution to
yeah,
systemic racism as
yeah,
well, you
yeah,
know, and I think therein lies the opportunity to partner, because
yeah,
to lead. I think where a lot of that challenge was, and where a lot of people deserve credit, is this is like org wide systemic change
yeah,
you're having access to
yeah,
at different parts of your career. Some only 5 years into their career, they're employee
yeah,
network chair for an organization that has over 10,000 employees,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
just from a skill and capability point of view,
yeah,
that's massive.
yeah,
And I think from that point of view, there's an opportunity there for organizations to support from a development point of
yeah,
view. 'Cause it's
yeah,
important. It's a win-win if they
yeah,
are able to represent the community better,
yeah,
the company's also better informed to support the
absolutely.
engagement there as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And what we're not saying necessarily is that when something external happens, that the burden of responsibility should be put onto the networks. But there's just this thing about the listening. You know, you can listen and and consult with. I love the racing model. Anybody that doesn't know,
mm,
I'm very big into understanding, okay, who's accountable, who's responsible, who should we consult, who should we inform. And you can imagine, if something happens externally, you consult with the employee network, you listen, and then you say, okay, we're thinking of doing this, what do you think about it, as leaders, and then you take the decision.
yeah.
Just picking up on Yemarai's point. Good morning, Yemarai. Is it still morning? It's not even morning. I'm saying good morning. It's good afternoon. It's good afternoon. It's because it's such a late night, and I'm usually doing this first thing in the morning. So Yemarai has said the Women in Tech group at my work has been pivotal to my success in my career in cybersecurity. It's really good to hear. Yeah, between you and Richard, man, you're selling tech to me. You're selling at least you're selling change in tech. You're selling that there has been positive change in tech, which is really good to hear. And Yemarai specifically pointing out the women in tech. And one of the questions I had was about intersectionality between women in tech and Black and colour in tech. So Yemarai, if you're still on, just maybe give your thoughts on that. Give your thoughts on how well that's working. But no, it's good. What sort of like practical advice have you got for people running employee networks within the tech sector in particular,
Yeah.
or people in tech organizations that might be listening, in terms of how they can better support the networks?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go better. Actually, practical advice for network leaders.
Yeah,
I think um, there is so much that we can do, and people in networks are so capable, so talented.
mm,
Honestly, they can. I love this saying. One of my old mentors used to say this: "You're so great, you can do anything, but you can't do everything." And it's just like it's just like something I really like to caution is it's because it's running off of passion. You
yeah,
want you want to kind of solve every problem, and it can be a little bit like boiling the ocean. So you just need to take it in steps and be really strategic. And if you have a sponsor, try to, sponsors usually are more senior and can sort of help to, chunk out, what you want to achieve. And I think in that sense, less can be more if you do things, one thing at a time, really, really effectively. That's something I would have loved to have learned when I was a leader, that there's because you can be overwhelmed with the amount that there is but if you've got a roadmap, a strategy, another saying I love, which is, you kind of overestimate what you can do in a year, but underestimate what you can do in 5. Try and like build a really long-term roadmap where you can, tackle one thing at a time. That was, again, that's borrowed advice from someone to me that I sort of like love to pass on. And then I think for those supporting networks, I think it's really just give true empowerment and platform and involve them. I think sometimes we can get guarded about whose responsibility is what in terms of like solving a problem or, particularly around inclusion, because a lot of it is aligned to like people agendas or leadership agendas and whatnot. I think it's never a bad thing to have more people around the table thinking around a solution or in collaboration around a solution, whether it be a pay gap, whether it be underrepresentation, whether it be a particular experience within the organization, and none more equipped than the networks in terms of like feeding in, especially that qualitative data and that lived experience. So involve them, and that could be also policy reviews and things like that. We try to get quite structured about that, but ultimately the end goal is so that they feel empowered, they feel consulted, and the work that they do isn't just on the periphery or just about awareness days or just about celebration. It is about contributing to real change.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I mean, I mentioned the RACI because I talk about this. I did a LinkedIn Live quite a while ago now, and I talk about the DE&I ecosystem of different things, whether it be, like you say, learning and development, training, recruitment, policy, and being really clear about, what is the role of the employee network in this thing? Because as you say, the employee network can't do everything. And that's why we've got D&I leads, we've got HR teams, we've got line managers, we've got leaders, etc. Right? So almost like going through all of these things and saying, okay, well, this is where the employee networks actually can play a role. But then what is that role? Are they the doers? Are they just going to be consulted? Are they? Do you know what I mean? I think that's really useful. A point here from Richard. Good morning, Richard. Richard, I connected with Richard this week on LinkedIn. I live in the same town as Richard, which is so funny. Totally agree with trying not to do everything. The passion means you think you can see the path to the solution, but so many times I've seen network leaders burn out trying to solve the world whilst also doing their day job and run their lives outside work. Absolutely, totally true. The burnout thing. This is something, when we have the ERG leader summit in September, we're absolutely going to talk about this thing, because they're trying to do everything and then potentially burning out is a massive thing. So back to you, Emma. Just adding my 2 cents as to how the employee network helped me support and sponsorship for leadership and training programs, mentorship with women ahead of their careers, events that are women-led and women-empowered, makes us more comfortable about situations impacting. Through my Women in Tech support group, I was able to participate in a panel and inspire aspiring cybersecurity talent. When I attended tech conferences, heavily male-dominated, so I feel intimidated. It's then cut off there, but I'll read the rest of it when I get back into LinkedIn. And then there's somebody that we both know. Good morning, Caroline Mayhead. How are you doing?
Hi, Caroline.
Yeah, lovely to see you. And I can't remember. I'm thinking that when the call that I first met you on, which obviously was part of the Black Talent Awards, and the conversation, was Caroline on that call?
Yeah, it was me and Caroline. We were strategizing behind the scenes.
Trying to grill you, but trying to be nice about it to kind of show your data. So obviously, and the Black Talent Awards, obviously, which which Serco are headline sponsors of. Long-term time no speak. We need a catch-up. We absolutely do.
Yeah.
I think she's referring to you, Richard, rather than me, but Caroline, we need a catch-up as well.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, but and how was it? Just before we move on, how was being involved with the Black Talent Awards for you in terms of the judging? I know you couldn't make it on the night, and I said what fun we had on that call. We did.
So much fun. Yeah. So I mean, it was so inspiring for me to like for us to get involved in it. And then for me, individually, like in terms of like seeing the sort of the submissions, being involved with the process, it was just like 360 excellence, you know, because obviously we come on as a sponsor, and that was massive, you know, because it was like to be able to do that, fantastic. Then you're on, like, you're a judge, and you're looking to your left and your right at the other judge, and you're like, am I supposed to be like, you know, because everybody's awesome, and just and being able, you know, being part of that network, you know, now for the last 2 awards has been amazing as well. And I've you know, I think there's a few people that I'm going to be catching up with ahead of judging the day again this year. So there's that, and then you obviously have the entrance where like inspirational stories from like things like people like growing up abroad and coming over here with nothing and then building their lives and their careers and stuff like that. And again, you're like judging their thing, and you're thinking, should I be judging entry? Like, is this correct? And then the night itself, sadly couldn't go last year, but will be there this year. The first one, just being in the room again, it was such a massive shot in the arm. It confirmed why we need nights like that, initiatives like the Black Talent Awards to spotlight excellence. And I often say, you know, like in the workforce, because things are 100 miles per hour, you know, we have this lens of talent that's like this. Something like the Black Talent Awards allows us to realize, you know what, if you do that, there's actually talent, there's loads, and everything. And I think that's what I really loved about the awards, and I still continue to love about it. And as long as you all have me, I will be a judge and a supporter. Honestly, it's been fantastic being part.
It's absolutely great. And Yemara has said, will you be attending the Black Talent Awards today? But I think she means the Black Tech Awards.
Yeah, Black Tech Awards
tonight, which is it's the same acronym, isn't it? BTA, the BTAs. But I think it's Black Tech Awards. Yeah, right. We were talking about the Black Talent Awards. It's, you know, similar aims, I guess, but broader than the tech space. Richard, it's been amazing to talk to you this morning. I feel like we've actually just scratched the surface, especially around some of those topics were quite deep. But you know, but we did our best.
Yeah, we tried.
But thank you, and so many gems, you know, that I've taken away, especially that, you know, you can't do you can do anything, but you can't do everything, especially not all at once. And this tendency to overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in 5. And I thank you so much, Yemrai, for joining. I've currently got a cohort of VRG leaders, and one of the things I talk about is the importance of a multi-year roadmap, because otherwise you get fixated on, we've got to fix everything in the next 12 months, and you can't do that. So actually, you know, at least a 3-year horizon of this is what we're trying to get to, and these are the outcomes that we're expecting to see is really important. And involving the networks. That was the third thing you said, was about involving the networks in terms of like things like policy review. You know, get them doing real work. They want to do real work. They don't only want to do awareness days and bring cupcakes in and, you know, bringing in jollof rice and all that sort of thing. So yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's not bad. You know, I don't mind.
But yeah, I do need to learn to cook jollof rice. That's going to be on my to-do list next year. Neil has been brilliant to listen. Great discussion and a good trip down memory lane. Serco embrace, Serco and proud. Hashtag Serco and proud and the Black Talent Awards. Look forward to catching up with you both again soon. All right, that's it, guys. Thank you all so much for listening and for your comments. It's been a blessing. Richard, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today.
Thank you as well, Cheryl, for having me, and thank you everyone for dialing in.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. All right, take care. Have a great weekend, guys.
See ya.